The courtroom was quiet. The judge, an older man with silver hair and thick glasses, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the 12-year-old black boy standing confidently before him. A slow smile appeared on his face as he lightly tapped his gavel against the desk. "All right, young man," the judge said, his voice amused but firm. "Let's play a game, truth or lie. I'll ask you a few questions, and we'll see if you can outsmart me. Sound fair?" A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. The boy, dressed in a suit that was too big for his small frame, didn't laugh. Instead, he simply nodded, his sharp brown eyes locked on the judge's. The judge cleared his throat and leaned back in his chair. "First question," he began, his smile widening. "The law states that a person is innocent until proven guilty. Truth or lie?" The boy didn't blink. "Lie," he replied. A gasp spread through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And why is that?" "Because in reality, people are treated guilty first and have to prove their innocence," the boy said calmly, "especially if they're black." The judge's smile faltered slightly. He shifted in his seat, glancing at the audience, some murmuring in agreement, others whispering in shock. "All right," he said, his voice losing some of its playfulness. "Let's try another. A judge must be completely fair and unbiased in every case. Truth or lies?" The boy's lips curled into a knowing smile. "Lie." The judge frowned. "Explain?" "Because judges are human," the boy replied smoothly. "And humans have biases, whether they admit it or not. You, for example, have already decided I'm just a kid who doesn't know what he's talking about. That's your bias." The courtroom erupted into murmurs of shock. The judge's face turned red. His gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Order," he barked. The room fell silent again. The judge rubbed his temples, staring at the boy, suddenly realizing this wasn't the simple game he had anticipated. He had underestimated him. And now, he feared he was about to lose. Earlier that day, the courtroom had been buzzing with anticipation. Reporters sat in the back, cameras flashing as they whispered among themselves. The case had caught the city's attention: an unjust arrest, a child genius, and a judge known for his tough rulings. 12-year-old Marcus Jackson stood between his public defender and his mother, hands neatly folded in front of him. He didn't fidget. He didn't look scared. In fact, he looked completely calm. The arrest had been a mistake, or at least, that's what the police wanted people to believe. Marcus had been sitting in the public library when officers stormed in, accusing him of being involved in a recent burglary. The evidence? A vague description of a black boy in a hoodie. Never mind that Marcus had been reading a book on constitutional law when they dragged him away in handcuffs. The video of his arrest had gone viral. People were outraged, but outrage didn't always lead to justice. Now, Marcus stood before Judge Richard Wallace, a man known for handing out harsh sentences. The judge studied him over his glasses. "Son, do you understand why you're here today?" Marcus lifted his chin. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you know what you're being accused of?" "Yes." The judge adjusted his glasses. "Do you have anything to say before we begin?" Marcus hesitated, then spoke. "I'd like to represent myself." Gasps filled the room. His mother grabbed his arm, but Marcus shook his head. He had made up his mind. Judge Wallace's eyes twinkled with amusement. "You want to act as your own lawyers?" "Yes," Marcus replied. The judge chuckled. "That's bold." "Smart," Marcus corrected. The judge laughed again. "All right then, young man. Let's see if you're as smart as you think you are." And so it began. A game, a test, a battle of wits between a seasoned judge and a 12-year-old legal prodigy. The courtroom leaned forward, eager to watch the spectacle unfold. But no one, not even the judge, was prepared for what would come next. Marcus was about to turn the entire case upside down, and before the judge knew it, he'd realized something terrifying. He was losing control. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. He had expected this to be a simple, amusing lesson in humility for a cocky kid. Instead, Marcus Jackson had turned the courtroom into a chessboard, and Judge Wallace had just realized he was playing against a grandmaster. "All right, Marcus," the judge said, leaning forward. "Let's see how well you understand the law. Since you've chosen to represent yourself, I'll give you the chance to make an opening statement. Marcus nodded, stepping forward with the confidence of a seasoned lawyer. His suit still looked too big, but suddenly no one noticed. It was his presence that filled the room, not his clothing. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady, I stand before you today not just as a defendant, but as an example of a flawed system. I was arrested without probable cause. I was accused based on nothing more than my skin color and the assumption that I must be guilty. But today I will prove that your law, was broken. Not by me, but by those who arrested me. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Even the reporters stopped typing. The judge tapped lightly on the bench. That's a strong accusation, young man. It's not an accusation, Marcus said, tilting his head. It's a fact. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The judge sighed, glancing at the prosecutor, a tall man in a crisp navy suit. Mr. Callahan, the judge said, I assume the state is ready to present its evidence. Callahan stood, smirking slightly. He had underestimated the boy too, but now he was ready to put him in his place. Absolutely, Your Honor, he said, stepping forward. The state has surveillance footage placing the defendant near the scene of the crime, as well as a witness who identified him. Marcus didn't flinch. Objection? The judge raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? On the grounds that being near a crime is not the same as committing one, Marcus said smoothly. And I'd like to see this so-called footage. The judge nodded. Let's see it. A screen flickered to life, showing a grainy black and white video of a figure in a hoodie walking past a convenience store. It was dark, and the person's face was barely visible. This, Callahan said confidently, was taken just minutes before the store was broken into. This individual matches the description given by our witness. Marcus folded his arms. What description? Callahan frowned. Excuse me? You said I matched the description, Marcus repeated. So, what was the description? The prosecutor glanced at his notes. The suspect was described as a young black male wearing a hoodie. Marcus let out a slow, deliberate breath. So, to be clear, the only reason I was arrested was because I'm a black kid wearing a hoodie? The courtroom buzzed again. Callahan's jaw tightened. You were in the area, and the witness confirmed. Which witness? Marcus cut in. Callahan sighed, clearly irritated. We'll be bringing them in to testify shortly. Marcus nodded. Good. Because I have a few questions for them. The judge held up his hand. Let's keep this moving, Mr. Callahan. Do you have any stronger evidence than a blurry video and a vague description? Callahan hesitated, then shook his head. Not at this time, Your Honor. Marcus smiled slightly. Interesting. The judge leaned forward. All right, Marcus. Since you're so confident, why don't you tell us where you were at the time of the crime? Marcus adjusted his tie. Gladly. I was at the city library. Callahan scoffed. Can you prove that? Yes, Marcus said, and I can prove something even more interesting. The judge narrowed his eyes. And what's that? Marcus turned to the bailiff. Your Honor, I'd like to submit my library checkout records as evidence. A low gasp rippled through the courtroom. Callahan frowned. How does that prove anything? Because, Marcus said, not only was I at the library, but I checked out a book at the exact time the store was being robbed. He turned to the judge. The timestamp is printed on the receipt. It's irrefutable proof that I wasn't there. The judge's lips pressed together. Bailiff, bring the document forward. The courtroom watched as the bailiff handed the receipt to the judge. He scanned it quickly, his expression unreadable. After a long moment, he sighed. This receipt shows that you checked out a book at 8:42 p.m., the judge said. Exactly, Marcus said, and the store was robbed at 8:40 p.m. There's no way I could have done it. Callahan's face paled. Marcus turned to the prosecutor, his voice calm but powerful. You arrested me with no real evidence. You brought me here with nothing but assumptions. And now your entire case is falling apart because you underestimated me. The judge exhaled, rubbing his temple. All right, let's take a short recess. We'll reconvene in 20 minutes. He banged his gavel, and people stood to stretch. The courtroom doors burst open, and a police officer rushed in, looking frantic. "Your Honor," he called, panting. "We just got a report. The real suspect has been caught, and he already confessed." The room froze. All eyes turned to Marcus. He didn't say a word. He just smiled. A heavy silence settled over the courtroom. The officer held up a manila folder. The real suspect was caught breaking into another store just 15 minutes ago. When questioned, he confessed to both crimes, including the one Marcus was accused of. Judge Wallace stared at the officer, then slowly turned to Marcus. The 12-year-old genius stood tall, his face unreadable. He had known it all along. The judge tapped his fingers on the desk, his expression darkening. "Officer, are you telling me that we've been putting this boy on trial for a crime someone else just admitted to?" The officer shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Your Honor." Murmurs exploded through the courtroom. Reporters furiously took notes, cameras flashing. Marcus's mother grabbed her chest, overwhelmed by emotion. Callahan, the prosecutor, clenched his jaw. He had been so sure, so arrogant. Now he looked like a fool. Judge Wallace exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. "Mr. Callahan, do you have any explanation for this?" Callahan opened his mouth but hesitated. There was no explanation that wouldn't make him look incompetent. His case had just collapsed in real time. The judge turned back to Marcus, his voice quieter now but with a new respect. "Marcus, you knew, didn't you?" Marcus nodded. "I knew I was innocent. I just needed time to prove it." The judge sighed, rubbing his temples. "This is a disaster." He took a deep breath and then sat up straight. "The charges against Marcus Jackson are officially dropped. This case is dismissed." A cheer erupted from the back of the courtroom. Marcus's mother rushed forward, throwing her arms around him. "Oh, baby, I knew you'd prove them wrong," she sobbed into his shoulder. Marcus hugged her back, but his mind was still working. He had won, but something didn't sit right. The police had arrested him too easily. The prosecutor had pushed too hard with almost no real evidence. And now, just as he was about to break the case apart, the real suspect was conveniently caught. Something was off. The judge slammed his gavel, bringing order back to the room. "Court is adjourned." But just as people began packing up, Marcus spoke up. "Wait." Everyone turned to look at him. The judge frowned. "Marcus, the case is over. You're free to go." "I know," Marcus said. "But I have a question for the officer." The officer shifted, suddenly uncomfortable. Yes?" Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You said the real suspect was caught just 15 minutes ago." "That's right," the officer replied. "And he confessed on the spot." The officer hesitated. "Well, yes." Marcus tilted his head. "That's odd." The courtroom fell silent again. Judge Wallace raised an eyebrow. "What's odd, Marcus?" Marcus turned to face the judge. The real suspect was caught breaking into another store. How did he get from one robbery to another so quickly? A long pause filled the room. The officer shifted again, and Marcus pressed. "And why did he confess right away? Was he caught with the stolen goods? Was he seen at the scenes?"